Hey everyone, welcome to Unit 3 of the MAAF Critical File and Content Overview. So in this chapter we'll be analysing business operations, including classifying value chain activities in accordance with Porter's value chain classifications, identifying an organization's competitive advantage, and number 3, applying appropriate decision models to short-term decisions such as outsourcing, product line development, product mix, and supply chains. Okay, so let's talk about the first subchapter, which is identify value chain activities in accordance with Porter's value chain classification. So Porter's value chain is a framework for breaking down the activities which an organization engages. So it builds on Porter's concept of generic strategies. If you remember this diagram from earlier in the textbook, it's the value chain here, splitting it between primary and support activities. So here you can see how Porter has broken down each part of the business. So for example, with primary activities, which is the main business focus, so the inbound logistics, the operations, the outbound logistics, the marketing, the after-service sales, and then also you've got your support activities, which may not be customer-facing and may not be the primary objective of the business, but they're still essential parts of the business. For example, your administrative function, so it might have your accounting team in there, your HR management, so your management of people that you're hiring to support the primary activities, your technology development and your R&D, and then your procurement and so forth. So here we can see that value chain versus value added concept we mentioned before, where we've got what are the value add activities, i.e. the primary support activities. So if we look at the definition of value chain, it looks at the end-to-end activities that need to come together in order for the product or service to arrive at the customer. So Porter extends this chain outside of the organization. He considers the conversion process from absolute commencement through to the delivery into the hands of the customer itself. And a good example of this is IKEA. You might consider them in the delivery of furniture or the sale of furniture, in which case the value chain would be from the the supply of wood for their products, all the way up to the shipping and the design and the warehousing and the inbound logistics of all of those into the store. However, if you actually apply Porter's chain, you'd also consider that the assembly component, which is done by the consumer, it's actually after they've purchased the product. So assembly is a non-value adding activity for customers, and removing it from the manufacturing process can help reduce the final cost of the product, which is the main basis of IKEA and why it's been so successful. So the other concept to understand, or definition to understand, is value added. So we talked about value chain, how that was the end-to-end activities that need to come together, whereas value added considers what value the product or service brings to the customer. For example, an add-on accessory in the car industry, e.g. a GPS or sunroof, add value from the customer's perspective to the final product. So this may lead to an increased profits for the organization through increased sale volumes or increased sale prices. So you can actually combine the two concepts together. So you can combine your value chain and combine your value added analysis and use that to identify opportunities within that process which either remove costs from a product or service, e.g. you look for the non-value adding steps and cut them out, kind of like what IKEA did with the assembly process, or it could be increasing the value of a product to the end consumer. Remember the example of the sunroof, for example. And if you can add that extra value, you might be able to increase your selling price. So here we've got some examples from the textbook in case you weren't sure about what each of those mean yet. So value chain decisions includes transferring responsibility of delivery to the products, e.g. the customer comes and picks up or pays for the transport. Number 2 example is instead of bottling the wine or juice or cooking oil or whatever it is where it's produced, transport them in bulk containers and bottle them closer to where they are consumed. So that's what Coca-Cola does. You've got your head company in the US. They don't actually ship out those Coke cans to those other countries because that shipping cost is more expensive. What they do is they ship the ingredients without water to the separate companies, and they actually have bottling plants in each of the different countries where they just add water effectively then add it to bottles and sell it from that country there. More examples include outsource distribution to a single logistics organization, e.g. DHL, to get bulk discounts, maybe creating a global network of low-cost suppliers. Okay, so what about value-added decisions on the other hand? Some examples of that might be employing specialist staff and adding entertainment to a hairdressing environment. So therefore, you can make the experience less stressful for the customers, and then they would therefore pay a premium price. So you're adding that value. Another example would be an airline providing various classes of waiting lounges. So customers might pay more, and they get to have more premium experience whilst waiting in the lounges and so forth. After sales support for computer purchases, selling goods direct to consumers using a website instead of using the retail sector. However, this one could, depending on how you interpret, this could either be in the value chain or value-added decision. So it would be a value-added decision if the use of selling direct to customers improved the seller's experience, and that was the primary purpose. However, many companies actually just do that to cut costs. And in fact, if the retail sector is an expensive part of their value chain, they might decide to cut it out and instead only use direct to customers via a website, and then it would probably fall under the value chain decision. Okay, so the next what we have to do is we have to identify an organization's competitive advantage using value chain analysis and recommend strategies to improve it. Okay, so classifying the value chain, primary and support activities. So now we're going back to that diagram we mentioned before. We know what the primary activities are, we know what the support chain, the value chain is for a business, and now we need to do a deep dive per quarter and understand how to actually classify each of those categories into either primary or support. So primary, the definition of that is it directly rates the organization's output. Support is enabling the organization to efficiently complete its primary activities and indirectly related to the organization's output. So I mentioned before, I went through each of these and said, okay, so after sales support service, that's primary activity because you're supporting your customers. Marketing and sales is marketing direct to consumers to sell your product. And so forth. Whereas these support activities down the bottom, it's more just, your accounting. If you're going to hire people to do the primary activities, you're going to need HR, you're going to need payroll to pay their salaries, you're going to need an accounting team to actually report, your P&L on a monthly basis and so forth. So we've got a breakdown from the CSG of each of these different types of activities within the types of activities. So you've got primary support, and then within primary, you've got inbound logistics. So that's the ordering of fuel, energy, raw materials, parts, and so forth. It's used so you can actually manufacture it. Next is operations, which is converting the inputs into the final product. So for example, taking lumber, turning it into processed wood. So that includes production, assembly, quality assurance, and so forth. Then you've got outbound logistics, which is actually physically distributing the product to buyers and customers. And that includes warehousing, order processing, order picking, packing, shipping. Then you've got marketing and sales, so that's the sales force's efforts, e.g. advertising, promotion, network of dealers and distributors, market research to actually sell the good. And then finally, after-sales services, which is providing assistance to buyers and customers, such as installation, spare parts delivery, maintenance repairs, warranty claims, technical assistance, buyer inquiries, complaint management. Now, on the support activity side, which, remember, this is the activities which support the business and able to achieve its primary activities. We've got administrative infrastructure, which is the office of the CEO, accounting and finance, legal, risk management, regulatory, strategic alliances, property services, safety and security, management, information systems, and overhead functions. Then you've got HR, which is recruitment, industrial relations, training, management of work, health and safety, employee support, performance management. Then you've got technology, which is R&D, product R&D, process R&D, design improvement, equipment design, telecommunication systems, and so forth. Then you've got finally procurement, which is strategic sourcing, contract negotiation, supply tendering. Okay, so for this section, the questions asked when analyzing a value chain. So for any product, customers look for the best value supplier of a product of the desired quality, taking into account all the costs of dealing with that supplier. So the costs involve more than the sale price and not always measured in dollars. So this question takes into account more than just the physical process of transferring the product to the customer. It takes into account every point of contact between the customer and the supplier. So an analysis of a product or service to a customer includes industry review, so identifying the cost and differentiation advantage, basic structure and sources of cost advantage within the industry, competitors and their own competitive positioning, appraisal of the organization's own position. So how can costs that do not add value for the end customer be stripped from the chain? So there's a scope for removing activities along the value chain that do not add value. These activities usually occur at points where different organizations in the value chain intersect. Where processes are interlinked between organizations, making changes requires cooperation between parties. Where good measurement and management systems are in place, negotiating change is easier because there is a shared understanding and objective basis for discussing an intercompany cooperation. So what this is just saying is looking for synergies within your group. There might be some duplication where two parts of your organization do the similar job, or there's some overlap, so cutting out that and removing a part of the value chain to save costs. How can a value chain perspective provide extra value for customers? So value chain can be used to identify opportunities to create new value or eliminate or bypass non-value adding links. Non-value adding links, e.g. music industry moving from CD sales to online, no need for stores, travel agents needing to adapt business model as customers using online platform bookings. So ultimately, if you're creating efficiencies for your business, you're making more money, right? And it also gives you the opportunity to invest back into the business to improve areas that need improving. Okay, so the next is applying appropriate decision models to short-term decisions such as outsourcing a product. Okay, so if you've got a distribution function in-house and you're weighing up whether to outsource that to DHL, for example, this is the decision process you'd follow to understand that. So short-term decisions making and supply chain management. So after analysis, you need to identify areas of the business that create value for customers at the most optimal levels. For example, outsourcing, cost reduction initiatives, i.e. reduce or eliminate non-value adding activities, strategic alliances with suppliers or customers, development of new products or service, or introduction of TQM or JIT methodologies. So that's total quality management and just in time, basically. So management needs to look through these and look at the alternatives and figure out what actions provide the greatest long-term benefit for the organization. For example, outsourcing, it might be a situation where we save some money in the short term, but in the long run, if the customer experience declines because of that, then it's not worth pursuing. On the other hand, if we feel like it's going to save money and it's going to improve the customer experience in the long term, we can use that money to improve other areas of the business. Or we could just reduce costs, reduce the cost of the product and still make the same amount of profit. So decision-making models. So decision-making is the act of weighing up two or more alternatives, for example, whether or not to outsource it, or maybe it's outsourcing, but to whom we're outsourcing it. So maybe you've got three different options, and you can consider price and reputation and so forth. So decision produces one final choice. So decision-making model is useful in complex decision-making like this. Alternative options to be evaluated in the decision-making process. So for example, outsourcing activities in the value chain, product line development and product mix adjustments, supply chain analysis and adjustments. So apply appropriate decision models to short-term decisions such as outsourcing. So the next step is we understand what a decision model is. It's the process of comparing different alternatives in order to make a decision. Now, how do we actually apply that in practice to a short-term decision? For example, whether or not to outsource our distribution center. Okay, so the CSG actually puts forward this 7-step process to do this. So number 1 is identify the problem. Number 2 is identify what the ideal solution is. Number 3, I'll generate alternative solutions. Number 4, evaluate alternative solutions according to the criteria. Number 5, make a decision based on the evaluation. Number 6, implement the decision. Number 7, monitor the decision. And this is probably the step that gets missed the most, is monitoring, because people go through, they'll probably model out what they're expecting. They'll go and do the decision, but then there's no follow-up afterwards. They don't do any, modeling of the returns and so forth to make sure the assumptions in our decisions actually translated to reality. Now, something to keep in mind is especially with the MAAF subject, is that the detail we go through in the critical files it's quite a high level of it's quite a lot of detail, and it's not all relevant for the exams, because in the exams you'll get a practical question, you'll go through it, you'll answer it. You probably don't need to know all of this. It's just probably better for background knowledge. Okay, so let's just do a quick deep dive into some of these steps. The first one, identify and agree the problem. So it's just understand what it is, formally research it, stress test the analysis. Number 2 is identify what the ideal solution would be. So it doesn't necessarily mean come up with the solution. It just says, what's the ideal solution? Whether it's achievable or not. And maybe you have more than one solution, which would be, and the criteria by which this would be measured. So it's to articulate what the organization hopes to achieve by addressing the problem and what an ideal end state would be, to provide measures to ensure there is a rational basis to evaluate potential solutions. Okay, number 3, generate possible alternative solutions. So you need alternatives to kind of compare it to, because your best ideal end state may not be practical to achieve, and it may actually not be the best as you originally thought once you actually compare it against some alternatives. Number 4 is evaluate the alternative solutions according to the criteria. So to formally review each alternative, ensure that a rational assessment is made of each. To rank and present the various alternatives based on the ability to solve the problem. And this is where the management accountant will provide substantial input. There are many frameworks of financial models available to evaluate financial problems. Okay, and then make a decision. So you just choose one, formalize which one, and the commitment to it. Number 6 is implement it. So once we've chosen it, actually following through the steps to implement the decision. So it means putting the right people in charge of managing it, which may not be the same people who has identified the problem. And then finally, monitoring the decision. Okay, so once the decision's effective, coming back, revisiting it, and seeing how it's going. You may need fine-tuning or revisiting or remedial action. So outsourcing activities in the value chain. So we mentioned before that when you're assessing the value chain, there's an opportunity to actually look at some items which are non-value add. And there's also an opportunity to look at items which might be value add, but you can actually get more value if you were to outsource it by a third party or more efficient at achieving this task than you are. So I used the example before of logistics, outsourcing logistics to DHL. That's what they're experienced in. They got the software, they got the teams. They can probably do it at a much at a better quality at a cheaper price per unit. So if parts of an organization's chains are not performing at the optimum level, i.e. non-competitive or non-value adding, a decision to outsource these activities may A. reduce the total cost of its products or services, B. improve the efficiency and competitiveness of the organization, C. increase capacity, D. provide access to a greater level of skills and or knowledge, E. allow for greater focus on core activities. So when you have a situation like outsourcing, that's when you actually apply the decision models, which we talked about above, in determining whether you would actually outsource it. So 4 questions posted in the CSG to consider, to ask when considering outsourcing. So number 1, can the activity be performed or produced at a lower cost, more efficiently, or to better quality by outside suppliers? Okay, because there's different areas, right? So are they doing it cheaper? Are they doing it better? Is it more efficient, or is it a combination of one or more of those factors? The reason this is important is because to maximize the profit, the organization requires the best value supply of a product or service, taking into account all of the costs. So an example here is a heavy engineering organization may outsource the production of an electronic part, requiring sophisticated electrical engineering experience that it does not have. Because if you're a smaller organization, you're going to have more generalist staff as opposed to specialist staff. If you're a large organization or an organization that focuses on one thing, for example, a specialist engineering company, it's going to be more efficient for you to hire those staff, and actually other companies pay you for that specialized task, and you can do that to a high level of efficiency and value. Number 2, is the activity part of the organization's core competencies? So the organization would not want to give away its trade secrets or control of activities which are key to delivering its customers' value and to its competitive advantage. An example is a fast food franchise with a particular recipe that makes its product unique and desirable would not want to lose control of this trade secret. So for example, KFC, 11 secret herbs and spices, they're going through their value chain and they're assessing, okay, what if we actually outsource the the chicken making or the salt or the flavoring construction. They may say, well, this is a significant part of our business competency, is that secret herbs and spices. We don't want to outsource this part, even though they can do it for cheaper, because it's a part of our core competency. Number 3, does the activity rely on rapidly changing technology? So unless the core competency of the business is in the development of rapidly changing technology, it's unlikely to be cost effective to develop this expertise and capability in-house. So many computer manufacturers use Intel processors in their products. Intel does all the product research and development and has a reputation for quality product. Computer manufacturers leverage the strong Intel brand as part of the value their product brings to the customer. So because processes change so rapidly, it's going to cost a lot for companies to actually do that in-house. Hence why something like that is a specialized company, which is often outsourced by tech companies. 4, will outsourcing the activity result in business process improvements such as reduced lead time, greater flexibility, or reduced inventory levels? So to ensure the best use of limited resources, if outsourcing activity will lead to process improvements and cost savings, then it should be considered, subject to protection of core competencies and competitive advantage. So, for example, here we've got a clothing store and a retail outlet. We're now outsourcing the distribution and supply of clothes and inventory for these stores to an external third party, and they may agree to keep a buffer inventory of raw materials and components, i.e. the suppliers agreed to keep that on hand, which may improve the delivery time of requirements, whereas the store itself probably won't keep that buffer on hand. Hence, the business is now operating at a higher level of efficiency. Okay, so assessing make or buy alternatives. So to quantify a make or buy decision, 2 decision models are commonly used. Number 1, the relevant and differential cost model, and number 2, the opportunity cost model. So under the first one, the relevant and differential cost model, the question to be answered under this model is what costs will be saved and what costs will be incurred under each scenario. So it's a cost focus. And the opportunity cost is the company using its limited resources to the best way possible? So it's saying, yes, this is a good opportunity, but what else could I put my money to work earning 20% return per year as opposed to 15% in this investment? The company's more likely to pursue 20%. It's not to say that 15% is a bad investment. It's that there is an opportunity cost of 5%, or the difference between if they had just invested in that other one. Okay, next section is applying the appropriate decision models to short-term decisions such as outsourcing product. Okay, so generally when we're talking about the output of an organization, we're talking about the fact that it has multiple products and or services, and because of that, a periodic review of the operating results of each product service should be done. The reason being is, you might have a good product mix now, then in 5 years' time you have a look again and you realize that one of your products, maybe you're selling air conditioning, is actually losing money. Now, if you've been doing that review on an ongoing basis, you would have seen a decline in one of the product lines, you would have made a decision, maybe we shouldn't invest any more in this, focus on the other product lines and so forth. That would have resulted in a much higher profit level overall. So the purpose of this review is to determine whether the mix is optimal, which is what I was talking about before, and represents the best use of companies' resources. So could we have put that money elsewhere as opposed to just keeping our money in a low return asset? So this assessment just looks at the products to keep and in what proportions, and which to extend, which to enhance, which to modify, which to discontinue. So the air conditioner we might discontinue, but if you've got one product that's doing really well, maybe we want to extend it into a different market, maybe we want to modify it, expand on it a little bit more. So the assessment of doing this would involve the following. So number 1, a market summary of current position. So where are we sitting now in the market? B, forecast future demand and price sensitivity. So we need to model out to the future and say, okay, we're expecting 5% for this product, 10% for this product. And if we put prices up another 5%, what's going to happen to our demand? Is that going to go down? And so forth. So forecast future demand and price sensitivity. C, internal costing and product profitability information. So we need to look at the cost structure of each product line, and so forth. And then the time frame for implementing any recommended changes. So the decision to abandon a product or service will occur when the contribution margin of the product and service doesn't cover the avoidable fixed costs, or another organization offers to buy the rights to the product and or service at a favorable price. Okay, so let's talk about supply chain. So what is a supply chain? So a supply chain is it's an interlinked group of suppliers and customers working together to produce and distribute goods and services among themselves and to others. For example, if you are Aldi or Coles or Woolworths and you've got your product on the shelves, you need a supply chain of fruit suppliers coming from the people who grow the fruit to the people who purchase it wholesale to the people who package it, manage it, distribute it, and so forth. Similar with cars. So Tesla, for example, it's made up of thousands of different parts. Tesla doesn't make all those parts themselves. Same with BMW, Toyota, and so forth. What they'll rely on is a supply chain. It's a little bit of an ecosystem of customers, well, I should say sellers, who manufacture, specialize in a certain part. They then supply it to Tesla at a very cheap, affordable rate compared to if Tesla just prepared it itself. So it's important about applying the value chain that we discussed above and actually finding opportunities within that supply chain to enhance efficiency, strategy, cut costs, and create value. So supply chain management is the process of developing strong relationships, managing interactions across the supply chain, from original suppliers through the organization's internal processes, then onto customers who make the final product. So there's two main techniques that can be used to assist supply chain management. Quite important to understand what these mean, what they do. So the first one is the total quality management. So this is something that was pioneered in Japan, and it's a technique that aims to deliver operational improvements throughout every single step of the value chain in order to provide superior products or service to customers. So the perfect example of this is Toyota. So in the 70s and 80s, Japanese cars had a really bad reputation. It was kind of like how you think of Chinese cars today. Obviously that's changed significantly, but one of the driving factors was Toyota's total quality management, which is something that they implemented. And basically what that meant was that every single person was responsible under this philosophy for the quality of assets they're producing. Everyone had this mindset of everything needs to be close to perfect. If we find a fault, we need to investigate it very thoroughly, test it ongoing until we fix it. And every part, no matter how small, needs to go through this process so that everything we do is almost perfect. And of course, that's why Toyota today has this excellent reputation for reliability, because of this total quality management mindset. So the next really important methodology of supply chains is just-in-time production, or JIT. And again, this one's also really important to know for your exams. So basically what this means is, instead of holding a whole bunch of stock on hand as inventory, or finished goods, or purchase raw materials, what it involves in is, with a deep understanding of your business and the seasonality of the requests, is actually just if the supplier just orders the demand in right before you order it. That way, there's always going to be a low delivery time, and also means you can keep your working capital dollar contribution quite low. Some examples here. So for example, production processes are carried out in groups of machines to minimize material movements. The benefit of that attribute is that cost savings through co-location, being able to reduce handling, more streamlined process. So in a situation where the supplier holds raw materials and components chosen for their ability to deliver quality items in a timely manner. So there's going to be cost savings, first of all, from the elimination of raw material stock on hand, because you're going to reduce that. COGS savings will likely improve. It's going to reduce waste. It's going to reduce the need for rework in the instance something changes. And it increases customer satisfaction with fewer complaints due to quality issues. Okay, so next one is control and monitoring issues. So it's really important whenever we do analysis is to always consider, is there a step at the end that we need to do to actually monitor it, control it? That's when we actually logic check the assumptions, make sure that they're on track. And if they're not on track, it's something that we need to look at, because it's used for the IRR. So the key issues to the manager to minimize the risk of failure is supplier selection and reliability, relationship, location, and quality assurance. So supplier selection and reliability. So if the wrong supplier is picked, the company risks stock out issues, missed opportunities. The reason is because the company's under the just-in-time methodology, the suppliers are holding very low stockpiles of inventory, so there's a lower margin to get things wrong. So relationships. So developing effective relationship within a supply chain alliance involves a number of key elements: trust, shared vision, shared objectives, and so forth. So the common themes for failure is being overly optimistic, poor communication, lack of shared benefits, slow payback, lack of financial commitment, and so forth. Okay, and then two more considerations at the end: location, what's the physical site, and then quality assurance, so having a clear definition of what it is to expect, and document performance measures providing the framework for quality assurance. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 3. There's not a lot of value, but if we just quickly do a recap here, we talked about the value chain versus value add. So this is the end-to-end activities, whereas value add is what you can add on top to improve the value for the customer and therefore drive sale prices. We talked about some examples of each for those. We also split the value chain into primary activities and support activities, and then just went through examples of this. This could potentially be a common multiple choice question or even in the exam, where you have to allocate it into the right category, primary activity or support activity. And in that case, just refer to this table here because it's got quite specific elements. And if not, just refer to the closest thing in here because I remember there being some trick questions around this before. Okay, and that's pretty much it for the chapter. We've got a short-term decision-making model process that we can follow through and link into our assumptions. Otherwise, everything's pretty straightforward and clear. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.